ACC Nation football preview with our special guest, the senior staff writer and lead football beat writer for Tech Sideline, Andy Bitter. Thanks for joining us, Andy.
Thanks for having me.
Let's toss aside the past. This isn't your dad's Beamer ball anymore. Media outside of the Roanoke and New River Valleys, well, they don't quite know what to make of the Hokies. Virginia Tech is rebuilding under Coach Pry, and that means reestablishing relationships, recruiting, and rigor in exercising game plans on the field effectively. So, Andy, what do you think so far?
Well, I don't quite know what to make of it. I mean, I'm not going to come down hard on the national types that don't know what to make of it when I have a front row seat here and I don't quite know how things are going. I think, big picture, they're turning things around in terms of relationships, recruiting, winning back the state, winning back the hearts and minds of Virginians that have sort of been wayward in recent years as Virginia Tech has struggled over this last decade. On the field, I don't know if it's quite at that level yet. And, this is a team that went 3-8 last year. They brought in a lot of transfers at some important spots, but I think there's still plenty of work to be done on that side of it. So, I think the recruiting surge that they've had this summer is maybe a little bit of ahead of where the on-field product is in terms of turning things around. But, who knows? Could be proven wrong once we get to the fall here. And, people always surprise you and play better than you think.
So I read someplace that no one had been to the high school that Michael Vick went to recruit for almost a decade. Is that right?
I think I've seen the same quote out there. I'm not sure exactly how valid that is. I don't know why they make it up. I know there were areas of Virginia that felt, underutilized from the previous staff. Didn't make the rounds as often as they should, and kind of work those relationships as well as they should. I think that's something that Brent Pry has come in. He's made it a focal point to do. He knows why he was hired. He knows his connection to the past here at Virginia Tech, and how Frank Beamer treated in-state recruiting, and forged those relationships with people in the past. So, I think Pry knows what his mission is recruiting wise. It's to kick North Carolina and ideally Penn State out of the heavy areas where all the recruits come from, and really forge those relationships. And when Virginia schools have a really good prospect, be in the mix for it. And there was a time for, 4 or 5 years, not quite the entire Justin Fuente era, but most of it, where Virginia Tech just wasn't even a factor in those players. And I think the Hokies are starting to turn that around.
It's 757 and growing more and more so. The 804 becoming really juicy areas to recruit in. And it just amazes me that any school in the state of Virginia is not actively recruiting the players that are in and around these two area codes. Of course, there's plenty of players in other area codes as well. Offense was challenging for the Hokies last year. An average per game, 20 points, a little under 20 points a game. That's painful. The defense, that seems to be coming along in a better clip. Let's get right into the meat and potatoes here. All right, Andy, who's QB1, Wells or Drones?
I don't know. I'd love to give you an answer. I don't know. I think Wells finished the spring as the top guy, but it's been 70 some days, I think, since spring ball finished. Who knows where Kyron Drones is right now in terms of picking up the playbook. He just got here in the winter, just started going through practice in the spring, whereas Wells had an entire year in the system and working with these coaches. So, Brent Pry at the end of spring ball said, Wells is probably the top guy right now, but Kyron Drones would play. And that's where they left spring ball. So it sounds like they would like to get both of those guys on the field. I don't know if that the balance tips more as Drones gets more through August camp and, where they're at when they come back from all their summer conditioning and stuff like that. But I would imagine this season both guys play. And I don't know if that's going to be a true 2 quarterback system or anything like that. But I think they're differing enough in their skill sets that they can both bring a little bit of something to the table. And I know people are going to be like, oh, if you have two quarterbacks, you don't have any. It's like, well, they didn't really have a quarterback last year. So it's not, they really struggled in that department in terms of pushing the ball down the field and getting production from that spot. So I'm not thinking this is any kind of step back in the quarterback room. I think they've enhanced that room. It just is yet to play out in terms of who's going to win that job.
I'm just going to throw this because I love really bad puns, but it's being proven on the world stage that drones are very effective offensive weapons.
Hey.
But all right, Will, let's jump into some more serious stuff here. Start breaking things down.
Be hard to top that. Okay, so again, like there's a lot of turnover on this offense, and in particular running back. We'll go there next. Obviously, we lost a couple of their big time carries, but I know they picked up another guy out of the portal. So how are the carry? Do you see it going to be a hot hand situation going into the season?
Yeah, I think it's always a hot hand. I look at Bashal Tutin, the transfer they got from North Carolina A&T, and Malachi Thomas is 1A and 1B in some order. Thomas last year never really was healthy. He had a preseason injury, he missed a bunch of games, came back for a couple, looked effective when he was back, and then re-injured his leg. So he missed, essentially 8-9 games last season. And Tootin comes in where he was really a workhorse at the FCS level, put up some really good numbers, over 200 carries, plenty of yards and production there. So I actually think this is a significant upgrade that they have in the running back room, having a healthy Thomas, having Tootin who's come in and who's done it before. They didn't really have that featured guy last year. It was Keyshawn King a little bit, Jalen Holston a little bit, Thomas when he was healthy, just nobody that could churn out yards in this running back room. And I think they have a couple guys this year who are capable of it if the holes are there.
The biggest win off the field in the offseason was picking up Ollie Jennings from ODU as a transfer, and that guy had big games against both Virginia schools. Absolutely lit up the Hokies in that opening night win, and then almost led them to a win over Virginia. But I think automatically, just by his addition, that wide receiver room should be a lot better this year. Then,
yeah, I think it's him, and Jalen Lane from Middle Tennessee, Daquan Felton from Norfolk State. I mean, they needed production there. They lost Caleb Smith, who was really the only guy last season who could get open with any kind of regularity. And even he didn't get open that often. You lose him, transfers to Notre Dame, and he ends up medically retiring once he's up there. But you had those three to Dawan Lofton coming back. Stephen Gosnell was hurt for a lot of last year. He came in, he was overweight, he slimmed down, he looks a lot better and more effective this year. Tucker Holloway was a freshman who came along late last year. You don't have to strain too much to go, this good receiver core could go 6 deep. And then you add in a tight end like Daquan Wright, Nick Gallo, possibly catching some passes. I mean, there's just some options in this passing game that they didn't have last year. There's just nobody that could get open with any kind of regularity. And, we all pin it on Wells and go, well, Wells didn't have a great season. It's like, well, he didn't have anybody to throw to either. So I think there's some options this year that should help out the passing game and be a little bit more productive this season.
Maybe a little bit of a remake on the O-line of a new O-line coach who had a hand in a lot of success at Cincinnati. Couple starters back, but again, just a little bit of a remodeling, I guess you'd say, on the offensive line.
Yeah, this is my biggest concern with the offense is, do they have enough guys on the offensive line? And they came out of spring ball, and Pry says he thinks they have 4 guys: Xavier Chaplin, the Moore brothers, Braylon and Caden, and Parker Clements. And as you know, you have to start 5 guys. So that's something they have to figure out. They bring in Clayton Frady in the transfer portal. Bob Schick played a little bit of right guard in the spring as well. But it gets young in that second group pretty quickly. And you're talking about freshmen and redshirt freshmen that are filling those spots. And, how often do you get through a whole season unscathed injury wise on the offensive line? Not very often. I mean, to play those same 5 guys over and over. So they need to find some depth in that group. They have to find a 5th guy. They have to find a starting rotation, which I think is still in flux, and they need to find some depth. And that's a lot of ifs for a group that, frankly, wasn't that good last year. I mean, you look at the root problems of this offense, they couldn't push anybody off the ball and therefore couldn't get a running game going. Protected okay in the passing game. But if you have no running game, then, everybody can just key in on your passing game and it's not going to be that effective. So, Brett Pry has said it over and over. It's like, we need to be better at running the ball and getting physical. And that's the style and brand of football they want to play. And it's got to start with this offensive line.
Yeah.
Let me, before we get into defense and special teams and everything, let me make an observation here and get your thoughts and feelings about this. What I'm seeing is a lot of transfers coming out of FCS and non-power 5 schools, whereas I'm seeing a lot of people transferring out Notre Dame, North Carolina. I'm not seeing the same influx coming in. Do you feel like Pry is going to find some success? And I will never discount anybody coming from, let's say, a North Carolina A&T. There's some great players coming out of these schools, and unfortunately, often are overlooked. But give me your thoughts and your feel about how these FCS players are contributing, and is this a trend that is going to continue, or is this building?
I think this will continue just because, you don't want to call it a feeder system, but it sort of is. And, with the freedom of movement now that you have, and, those players can move up to the FBS and to the Power 5 and not have to miss a year like they used to. Used to be they had to wait until they could graduate and then they could move on as a transfer without having to sit out a year. But everybody can move, freely now. So I think a lot of these guys that, especially a couple years removed from the COVID year, when recruiting was so weird and you couldn't do in-person evaluations, and how are you recruiting these guys if you haven't ever seen them in person and what they're like in the field? I think you're now 2 and 3 years out from that. You're seeing a lot of guys that maybe were overlooked in that whole process. That, Bashal Tutin, I think, only had a North Carolina A&T offer, so he took it and he went there and he produced, and he's like, all right, let me see if I can do it on the big time now and do it at a Power 5 school. So I think there's a little bit of that. It's a little bit of the transfer portal, and then just the freedom of movement that they allow in college football these days that allows guys to go to a small school, kind of blow up a little bit, then, try to hack it at a bigger school. And I think you're going to see that more commonly here going forward.
I like to see that, to be personal about it.
The FCS schools don't like it. I'll say that much. They don't like developing those guys and then watching them go off. But, that sort of has been the way it was. They just had to wait until they were seniors before they could do it.
Right. Lots of players going to the NFL out of FCS and smaller FBS schools as well. So, these are the types of players I think that they're out there. They're golden nuggets. Why not? So if Pry wants to dig into that gold mine and pull up those nuggets and put them to work, that's a great thing. Let's talk about defense here. We'll go back to the line again, because the line is always an issue with any team's success, whether it's offense, defense, and if it's both, then you got a real problem. No returner had more than 2 sacks last season. That's a problem. Is it being addressed?
They're trying. Their big transfer on the defensive line was Antoine Powell-Ryland from Florida, guy from the 757 a couple years ago, went out of state initially. They think he can help from that pass rushing perspective, but I think it's going to have to be a team effort. I don't think they have the defensive ends that can just overwhelm you. They don't have a guy that's just going to go out and get double-digit sacks or anything like that. They're pretty decent in the middle. Some experience there at tackle with Norrell Pollard, Mario Kendricks, Josh Fuga. That's a group that's played a lot of football games. I don't think any of them wow you, but they're really solid in the middle. But it's the ends where, Tywin Garbutt's gone from last year. He was their best pass rusher, even though he was playing through a foot injury most of the season. You lose Jalen Griffin. They just need some guys to step up. Cole Nelson could be a guy. Powell-Ryland, CJ McCray is in there as well. It's a lot of unproven guys that, haven't had the reps to get after the quarterback. Until you see them do that, I think that's going to be a pretty big question mark for this defense.
So 2 areas you bring up, the middle and the ends. Let's go with the positive first, the glass half full aspect of it. You got a solid line there in the middle, functional. how does the linebacking look? Because it feels, based upon what I'm seeing and reading, that linebacking is promising here.
There's just a lot of options there. I mean, it's, Hokies fans have been so used to just Dax Hollyfield is there and then somebody else. And he's been a constant for this program for 4 or 5 years, that now I don't really know who's going to be the Mike linebacker on this defense. I mean, is it Jaden McDonald? Is it Jaden Keller? Is it Stone Snyder coming in from VMI as a transfer? Could Alan Tisdale get some snaps there? He's been a weak side linebacker in the past. Kelly Lawson, I think, is a guy that's very interesting, and a weak side linebacker. He's 6'6". I think they list him as 6'4", but I think he's actually 6'6", and he's just all limbs. Like, he's just this incredible rangy athlete that's still learning linebacker. He came here, he played receiver his first season, but there was a play last year against Georgia Tech where he tipped the ball up into the air at the goal line to himself, intercepted it, and then returned it for a touchdown. And it was just like all his length and athleticism that made that happen. That I look at that and I go, man, he just got better and better as the season went on. I'm very intrigued by him. And then they have Keontae Jenkins playing that star position. So I think they're pretty solid with Jenkins and Lawson at those two spots. I think they're still searching for that Mike. And I don't think there's any one guy that's going to do it. I think they're going to have to mix and match to sort of figure it out there.
All right, glass half empty time. Let's go to the ends here, because that's where there's a concern. If you've got good corners, if you've got a solid safety, that weakness there on the end may be minimal. But let's look at about the defensive ends, edge. What's there, or what isn't there, and what should be there?
Yeah, I go back. Cole Nelson, I think, is a guy that is pretty promising, coming up in his second year as I guess he was a part-time starter last year. CJ McCray has speed. He can get off the edge. I think he needs to be a little bit more well-rounded. But Antoine Power Island, the Florida transfer, I think, is a big addition, because he did have some production. He was in a 3-4 defense, I think, in Florida, or a 3-3-5, something like that. He was essentially playing like a stand-up outside linebacker, I think, not so much a traditional 4-3 defensive end. I think that's what he wanted when he came here, but he's shown some ability, and he was a guy who had pretty solid recruiting rankings coming out of high school. So he's got that background that's pretty solid, and sometimes you see those guys take off, but they need somebody else to emerge there, whether it's Jordan McDonald or Keyshawn Burgos or some freshman that just arrives. They need some people there that can produce, and there's just not a whole lot of verified production there from the past. That has to be concerning for Pry and his coaches.
We'll take a look at that secondary, and let's find out where the Hokies are headed.
Yeah, it feels like the secondary is probably, if you consider it a strength of the defense, it's probably there. I feel like there's some really strong players. Like, we have another Stroman who's balling again for the Hokies, and then a guy like Mansour Delane, who I think has all ACC caliber potential. So it feels to me, and maybe agree with Andy, that this is probably the strength of the defense right here.
Absolutely, the strength of defense. I think all three of their cornerbacks, top three guys, have all ACC potential. Yeah, Dorian Strong, who really was the guy last year that Pry mentioned over and over and over before the season. He ends up breaking his hand against West Virginia in week 3 or 4, and missing the rest of the season. That's a huge loss for this team. And, it allowed Mansour to come in there and produce at the end of the year, and he was a really lockdown guy. But, getting Dorian back, adding him with Mansour, and then, Derek Canteen was a guy who transfers in from Georgia Southern. A couple years ago, he led the country in interceptions. They're going to slot him in that nickel spot, and he can play some other corner spots as well. But I think they feel very good about those top three guys, because they have those top three, and then there's a younger wave of cornerbacks who are just arriving or got here last year that, there's a little bit of a gap there. So having those top three veteran guys, I think, is going to be very good for this group. And then the safeties are solid. Stroman is coming on. He's really seized that spot there. And Nasir Peoples has played all over the secondary in the past. So you've got experience in Peoples, and you have a lot of promise in Stroman. I think from 1 to 5 in the secondary, that's the strongest part of the team.
Now, This hasn't been obviously a Hokies defense like in past. This is a team that only forced 9 turnovers last season. Is there something they maybe gonna have to try to do to force turnovers? Is it simply just the line needs to get better to force pressure on the cornerback or the quarterback, or whatever?
It probably all goes hand in hand. I mean, I know they brought in an MMA artist to help them work on like hand fighting on the defensive line to help some pass rushing techniques there. And if you're in the quarterback's face, he's going to make more mistakes there. I think some of it is getting into better situations on first and second down. So all of a sudden it's third and long, and they're passing, and you can go after passes like that a little bit more aggressively. So, I don't think there's a silver bullet in this whole thing on how to get more turnovers, but other than to just play better defensively, and those opportunities will come. But Pry, historically, his defenses have forced a lot of turnovers. They didn't last year, and I think one of his last years at Penn State maybe didn't do so great. But the track record is there that this is going to be an aggressive ball hawking defense, and I'll be curious to see if they can be a bit more like that this year.
Quick look at special teams. I feel like the kicking position might still be up for grabs heading into fall camp. Punter seems pretty solid. What are your thoughts on special teams?
Yeah, Peter Moore coming back as a punter. A little bit of a down year last year, but he was very solid his freshman year. And now entering a junior season, I think he could be pretty good there. Kicker is anybody's guess, I think. John Love is the scholarship guy. Will Ross had a great start to last season, then kind of faded a bit. Got replaced by Love after he had some extra point problems there. I forget exactly his stat. I don't think Virginia Tech made a field goal longer than 24 yards in like the last 7 or 8 games, something like that. Yeah. That's pretty rough. And they didn't have a ton of opportunities, but still they didn't have a kicker that they were really wholly confident in that spot. So that's been a position that, over the last, I don't know, 20, 25 years, Virginia Tech's had a bunch of really good kickers, especially recently. You look at the NFL, Joey Sly, Brian Johnson, John Parker Romo all getting chances there. It's a little off-putting to see them struggle at that kicking spot.
Before we get into the schedule, I want to circle back to recruiting as we were talking about at the beginning. And you'd mentioned just how well the Hokies have been recruiting, especially in state. Who's been kind of the catalyst for the success in the recruiting class so far?
Coaching wise, I think you look at Fontel Mines, especially around the Richmond area. I mean, he's Richmond born and bred. Like that guy is just, bleeds Richmond and Virginia, has done a very good job with those relationships he has there. Has a lot of 757 ties. Ali Jennings is somebody he's known since like 7th grade or something like that. I mean, he's just knows everybody around that area, and he's really been putting in a lot of work in terms of repairing those relationships, like I mentioned before, and going out and getting guys. I mean, I think that's part of the problem with the previous staff is they would be able to identify some of these recruits that they wanted. They could never land them. They could never get over the hump at the end and actually get those guys in the boat. So, Fontel Mines has done pretty well. J.C. Price has been a very solid recruiter this cycle. Sean Quinn is a pretty tireless guy going into Tennessee and areas like that. Derek Jones. I just think this is a staff that is pretty well regarded as recruiters, or at least communicators, that they go out there and they put the work in, and they're starting to see some of that success come through.
Jim?
Well, let's talk about the schedule. Opening with Old Dominion, then Purdue, Rutgers, Marshall. Interesting mix of teams there before we get into the ACC. I kind of have this mixed. I'm a 50-50 on this whole thing here, Andy. Change my perception of how and where these first 4 games could go.
I mean, that's exactly it. They could be 4-0, they could be 0-4, and neither would shock me. I mean, I'd be a little surprised. I'm thinking 2-2 or 3-1, 1-3 is more likely, but they should be heavy favorites against Old Dominion. They were last year too, and they lost that game down there in Norfolk. I know it's in Blacksburg this year, but that's always a pesky little opponent like that. Purdue loses a lot from last year, including its head coach. Rutgers hasn't exactly been on hot shakes in the Big Ten, and then they have that trip to Marshall that I think the Thunder and Herd are going to be keyed up for that game. This is welcoming a Power 5 school up into Huntington. Grant Wells coming back, used to play there. I think that could be a tricky one too. So, I look at all these and I go, yeah, the Hokies could win that. And I could look at that and I go, yeah, the Hokies could also lose that game. And there's just so many question marks surrounding Virginia Tech that I don't know exactly what you'll see in that first month, but I think it'll give you a good sense of perhaps what they're capable of once they do get to the meat of the ACC schedule.
Tell you what, my gut is that you go through Old Dominion, Purdue, Rutgers, and if you perform well and you come out with 3 wins there, Marshall to me is the biggest challenge in that 4. But if they pull out a win in Huntington against Marshall, I would venture to say the glass being half full is going to get a little bit more full, at least from my perspective, looking at this team, because Marshall is not a pushover. And boy, when you play in Huntington, holy smokes, that is, we live, breathe football, and it's a mindset there. It's crazy.
Yeah, and you look at where it drops on the schedule, finishing the non-conference portion the next week. They start ACC play against Pittsburgh. You wonder how much, looking ahead there might be in a situation like that. I know nobody ever wants to look ahead from a matchup like that, but when the ACC is on the horizon like that, maybe you do peek ahead a little bit and look at the group of 5 team that you're about to play and not take them as seriously as you should. So yeah, I think that's a tricky game. And, it's a good matchup. I'm glad they're playing it because, Marshall has been a pretty good scheduling partner for the Hokies in recent years, especially. And I'm eager to go up there and see what that whole thing is like up there in Huntington.
Interesting. It'll be an adventure. Pitt, Florida State, 2 games that are just going to be tough, as to be frank about it. But once you get to Wake Forest and then you have a break, I think there's a possibility you come out of that 1 and 2, and then you can kind of lick your wounds and figure out which way you're going to go. I just don't see any way to get around Pitt and Florida State, not at this point of a rebuild.
Yeah, Florida State's a tough one. I think that's a really loaded team. You're going down to Tallahassee to play. That's a very, very tough matchup for any team in the ACC. Pitt, it's not in Pittsburgh. And that place has just been a house of horrors, whatever the Acrisure Stadium, formerly Heinz Field. Every time the Hokies go up there, something disastrous happens, whether it's, Kenny Pickett just, gutting them, through the air, or Israel Abanikanda running for 340 yards, whatever it was last season that he ran for against the Hokies. This one's in Lane Stadium. And they usually play Pitt pretty well in Lane Stadium. Not the last time they were down here, but I think the challenge is, what Pitt's going to be. They're going to be this physical brand of football. It's going to be a Narduzzi defense. It's going to come up, on the line and put all the pressure on you and corners on an island and just say, can you beat us this way? And, I think the way that Pry is building this program, I think it's a little Pitt-like. He wants to be a physical team that plays really great defense and can run the ball. And that's what Pitt wants to be. And I think that's a real physical challenge early in the year. That's like, okay, are you guys capable of doing this, Virginia Tech? And I think that'll be a really good test for them.
Yeah, great test is a great way of putting that. I think if they come through that Pitt game with a good performance, maybe even a win, boy, that would be very telling. They didn't get in after their break. They get into Syracuse, Louisville, Boston College. I'm not really sure what to think of those 3 teams yet, but I also see an opportunity here for at least 2 wins out of that mix.
Yeah, I think you look at Syracuse, and I never quite know what Syracuse is going to be. I think they're better than people think. I know Garrett Schrader's really tough out as a quarterback. Just if he's healthy and he's running, that's just a tough team to handle, especially with the defensive front that they play. At Louisville, who knows what Jeff Brown's going to have in that first season, bringing a transfer quarterback, moving on from the Malik Cunningham era there. And then, I think up at Boston College, that's a very winnable game, because I look at the Eagles and I go, they're down there near the bottom of the ACC in terms of what they have coming back. And, people are saying that about the Hokies too, but if they're both down there, I think they both have a chance to win that game. I think those are the ones you have to win if you're trying to get this thing turned around to get back to a bowl game this season. So, trips up to Chestnut Hill have not exactly gone great the last 2 times they've been up there, but it's not exactly an imposing atmosphere either. They're not, going into the Lions' Den up there like they are in Tallahassee. I think, if you're asking for a road game, that's probably one that you would like.
So next up is NC State, and we're really not sure what the heck is going on there. We have an idea, but will it be executed? So that is, well, that's a possibility. That's a 50-50 game in my eyes right at this moment.
Well, they get them at home, so that helps. One more look at Brennan Armstrong. They've seen a lot of him over the years. Didn't see him last year. That game got canceled, but now they do get to see him here, reunited with Robert Anai as the offensive coordinator. And, NC State always plays some pretty good defense. I think the Hokies, have to be kicking themselves after that game last year in Raleigh, where they were up 21-3. Gave up 19 unanswered at the end of the game to lose. A game where they had 10 false start penalties and 13 penalties overall. I mean, talk about self-inflicted mistakes. To lose a game like that by 1 point when you have 10 false start penalties. If you're a Tech fan or a Tech player or coach, I think you feel like you should have won that game and probably should have won it pretty handily.
And finally, I want to point out that you have already done a preview on this game, which was posted today, which is the 19th of July, Virginia. So give us a little taste of your preview that people can find online.
Yeah, well, I previewed, if you go on there, it's got links to every game of the season. I went through each game of the season over the last month. And, the Cavaliers, unspeakable tragedy last year to start out with. I mean, I just, the job Tony Elliott did to get through that was pretty remarkable. But, you look at this season and, there are football concerns with that team now in terms of, how are they going to score points? How are they going to get that offense turned around? They're really down to one quarterback who's played at all, and he's an FCS transfer. Not a lot of explosiveness at the running back and wide receiver spots, questions on the offensive line. I think there's just a ton of offensive question marks on that team. They played great defense last year, much better than they did in Bronco Mendenhall's last season. But, their points per game were slashed in half. They went from 34 to 17. So, if you're Virginia Tech, I think you're looking at the end of the season, if you're at 5 wins and have to get one more to get to that 6-win mark in a bowl game, you have to feel pretty good about your chances going up to Charlottesville, a place that you've played pretty well over the years.
So just by what you've just said, you are projecting at least a 6-win season?
I don't know yet. I have to go through. Yeah, I see. I'm in like 5 or 6 wins. I'm kind of in that I haven't made an official prediction yet, but you talk about 50-50 games, and there's so many on this schedule that 50-50, you're probably going to win one for every one that you lose. I mean, that's just the way it works with 50-50 games. Yeah. It's just that's where the program is right now. And if they were to get to 6 wins, that'd be a 3-win improvement over last year. I know they didn't play that last game, probably could have won that and be at 4 wins, but even a 2 or 3 game improvement is moving in the right direction, especially from where this roster was a couple years ago. So, normally 6 wins at Virginia Tech, fans would balk at that and go, no, that's not what this program expects. I think right now, from where you are in the rebuild, Hokies, I think getting to 6 wins would be quite an accomplishment this year.
Yeah, getting a bowl bid in addition to that would be a nice turnaround from where it. And based upon what you've said about the defense, especially, this could be a return to your dad's Beamer ball team. So we'll see what Brent Pry's got up his sleeve.
I think they have to, because I don't think they're going to go out there and it's going to be a thing of beauty on offense. I think they're going to have to grit and grind, and and now grit is a taboo word after the Justin Fuente era at Virginia Tech, but they're going to have to grind their way to some wins here. It's not always going to be pretty, but a win's a win any way you can take it. And I think Virginia Tech fans don't take those for granted anymore. I think maybe they did for a while when it was 10 wins every year. And it's like, oh, that's just what we do here at Virginia Tech.
Right.
But, it's been more than a decade now where this program's been a little bit in the wilderness and not quite what it's been in the past. And certainly bottoming out last year with the 3-8 season. So I think people will appreciate 6 wins in a bowl game if they get to that this year.
Been long enough. Will, any final questions?
I didn't really have anything. I think we covered everything.
I thought maybe you'd want to bring up, since we talked about this offline, the two of you having this mutual background, if you want to show your shirts here. So,
Yeah.
Yes, Andy is a Minnesota
hockey. I went to Wisconsin, so I feel like I'm betraying with the Badgers. I have plenty of Badger shirts too, but I like this Gophers hockey shirt. So it's just the logo. Look at it. It's a happy gopher on the thing. I like it.
Minnesotan living in Virginia, and I'm the opposite.
Oh, there we go.
Indeed. Great look at Virginia Tech football. Special guest Andy Bitter from Tech Sideline. Make sure that you go there, Google, and then find it and subscribe with a look at the 23 version of Virginia Tech Hokies. Thank you very much, Andy.
Thanks for having me.